Please rise for the entrance of His Worship Mayor Michael Fougere.
Good evening, everybody. We'll begin the member of council for a prayer. We beseech thee, Lord, to bestow wisdom upon members of this council in order that their decisions may be founded in justice and prudence. Amen. Please be seated. A motion for the agenda for tonight?
I'll move the agenda.
Seconder, please. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. In the minutes for the April 14th meeting of council?
I'll move the minutes circulated, Your Worship.
Thank you. A seconder for that? Okay. Any errors or omissions? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. First report from Planning Commission. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks, Your Worship. This is an application for a lane closure, 235 7th Avenue. The area is called Eastview. In essence, this really is not a lane. It never has been used for a lane. There was no horses and buggies going down it, nor was there any vehicles going down it. So this is a piece of property that by legal description was an alley, has not been used. The opportunity is to sell it to the adjacent landowners for approximately $7,000. And then, of course, the long term, that there'd be a different valuation of their property as well. Planning Commission looks for concurrence, please.
Seconder for that motion. Seconder. Any comments or questions on the report? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor O'Donnell, Planning Commission, RC 1452.
Thank you. This is an application for a zoning bylaw amendment for Hawkstone Phase 3, Stage 2A. There are 3 recommendations here, and they're basically all municipal reserves. That is, this is the last pieces of property in what we have seen for Hawkstone in terms of the residential area, and it's just designating the last to a public service, parks, and again, we would look for concurrence, please.
Seconder for that report. Any questions or comments on the report? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We have 2 bylaws. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move, seconded by Councillor Murray, that bylaws 2014-7 and 2014-33 be introduced and read a first time.
All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Flagel, that bylaws 2014-7 and 2014-33 be read a second time.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. In accordance with the provisions and the requirements of both the Cities Act and the Council's public notice bylaw, Council will now consider bylaw 2014-7 respecting the closure and sale of a portion of the lane at 235 7th Avenue. If there are any members of the public who wish to address Council on this matter, they should indicate their interest at this time and come forward as directed by the Mayor. I see no one, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll call the question on second reading then. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Young.
I move, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell, that Council hereby consents to bylaw 2014-7 and 2014-33 going to third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously.
I move, seconded by Councillor Fraser, that bylaws 2014-7 and 2014-33 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Young. We'll move to report 45 of delegation. This is Greg Gianoli and Clayton Crawford. Good afternoon, gentlemen. If you could identify yourself, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and there may be questions from members of council afterwards.
Your Worship, Mayor Fougere, members of council, we are here representing Enbridge, who has applied for a discretionary use permit. We propose to demolish an aging 50,000 barrel tank at our existing Regina terminal, and we would like to replace it with a larger tank that is more suitable to the pipeline operations as it is today. That would be a 190,000 barrel tank. Just point out that the recommendation as it reads is a 250,000 barrel tank. We did submit a letter that I noted was attached to the agenda, correcting that to 190,000 barrel tank. That tank will be connected to an existing valve manifold with a 36-inch pipeline. So my name is Clayton Crawford. I am a project manager that will be responsible for the execution of this project from beginning through its end.
Thank you.
Your Worship, my name's Greg Giannoli. I'm the Senior Manager, Regional Services and Development. I'm responsible for the operation and maintenance of the Enbridge pipeline facilities in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and manage the facility that this tank is proposed to be built in.
Okay.
So we don't have a particular presentation beyond that. We're here in support of any questions or any clarifications that Council has to ask of us.
Thank you very much. I know there will be questions. Councillor Donald and Councillor Bryce.
Thanks, Your Worship. Evening, gentlemen. Thanks for taking some questions. So all of my questions will go through the Mayor. So I want to, Your Worship, what I'd like to do is kind of go back over some of the things that we discussed at Planning Commission so that members of Council will understand where we began. So let's start with the actual demolition of the current tank and what's involved and what happens when it's done.
Okay, so that tank is or will be cleaned. It's been in service for a number of years. At the bottom of any tank that's been in service, there will be some residual heavy product that falls out of the products that are held in the tank. So that tank will be cleaned. It will be cleaned to a specification such that it can go to a recycler if that's the way that the demolisher wants to go. We will contract the services of a third party to come in and effectively cut that tank in pieces and roll it like a cigar, basically, and then it gets removed from the site. There will be some piping around it as well that needs to be taken out, some older piping that won't be in service any longer.
Okay. So can I ask, Your Worship, all of those procedures from the cleaning and the handling of the materials that would be left, the residue, and the handling of the steel and pipe, does that follow all the provincial and federal regulations?
It definitely will. And Enbridge has procedures for handling the materials as well that may go beyond, that could possibly go beyond what the province requires.
Thanks very much. So somehow or other, Your Worship, the material that is to be stored in this tank or a previous tank has a piping system. Could you talk about that piping system and what you may do with the old and if there is a new?
The current tank, the 50,000 barrel tank, is tied in with two other tanks on site with a common line that fills and takes product out of the line. This new tank will have its own specific line that will take product, that will deliver product into the tank and will also take product off of the tank. That happens via a valve manifold. That manifold is tied into all of the tanks on the terminal and also onto all of our pumps that pump out of the terminal. So by controlling those valves, we can either fill or take product out of the tank.
Thank you. So is there a different standard, Your Worship, to pipes, to tanks that were built 50 years ago and something that you would build now? Could you comment on that, please?
Absolutely. The tank was originally built in early 1950s, I believe. The standards certainly weren't as rigorous as they are today. For those who don't know, Enbridge is actually federally regulated through the National Energy Board, so we would comply with the standards they have as well as the industry standards that are applicable to tank construction. So
Okay.
Quite a bit higher standard than 1950s.
Thanks. So one of the questions that came up at Planning Commission was a little bit about potential air quality or effective air quality. Could you describe for me how a new tank may affect that, either negatively or positively?
We have done or requested, engaged a third-party consultant to come in and do a prediction of what they think might happen with air quality. They believe that it is negligible over what the old tank would have. A new tank like this has what's called a floating roof. That floating roof rides up and down on the product as it fills and empties out of the tank. It has seals against the outside of the tank, and it retains any emissions that could escape. Plus, the fact that it's sitting on the product in the first place doesn't allow the vapors to build in any case.
Good. I think the second large issue that we discussed, Your Worship, was a little bit about the fact that there's an aquifer below. So could you talk a little bit about any safety mechanisms that you have to make sure that that is not impeached?
Sure. Within the Regina Terminal facility, we have a number of water wells around the perimeter of the facility that allow us to monitor groundwater levels and groundwater for possible contamination. To date, we have never experienced any groundwater contamination. The tank lot, or the tank berm, as we refer to it within Enbridge, will have a special lining that's very resistant to any type of penetration. I know there's a city bylaw dealing specifically with the requirements for construction over the aquifer. We will comply with that. I wouldn't anticipate any problems there. Again, the levels of construction that we'd be doing today are well in excess of the existing tank, so a significant improvement.
Thank you. Your Worship, I just would like a comment, if I could, as well, about federal, provincial, and local regulations and where Enbridge fits into that mix, if you wouldn't mind.
Again, Enbridge is NEB regulated, National Energy Board. Their standards are as high or higher than the provincial regulations. Where there's ever a discrepancy, we usually always take the higher standard also. So we should be compliant with all applicable standards.
Thank you for that. Your Worship, I'm wondering, have you already got compliance with the national standard?
Yes, we have our approval from the National Energy Board to proceed.
Did you have to do that before you could come to see us?
We understood that approval by the city would be contingent on us having approval from the National Energy Board, so we actually applied in parallel.
Thank you. Morning, Your Worship. If you would make a comment in this regard, do we have double the size of the upgrader in Regina? Would I make an assumption based on that there would be more volume to be stored, and that this is in part reaction to that?
The tank is actually being built for primarily for a new shipper who wants to deliver crude oil into the Regina terminal. So it's not directly associated with the co-op refinery, but we are tied closely with the co-op refinery. A lot of the storage in Regina is for the co-op refinery, but this tank is actually being built for a different shipper. So,
okay, thanks for that. So I'll finish with one more question, if I could. In summary, could you tell me why this is a good idea? From an environmental point of view in particular, but also in terms of an old tank and a new tank, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, definitely, I think I can answer both questions in one. While the old tank was, we do monitor, we have a very rigid, rigorous tank integrity program. I don't want to say the old tank was not in good shape, but it was a tank designed in 1950. Today's tank would be a 2014-15 design, so higher level of overall design quality, life expectancy of 20, 30 years minimum. So I think it's why is it a good idea? I think you're getting a higher quality tank. From an environmental perspective, that would be the rationale. Yeah, I don't know, Clayton, if you have any.
Well, that's very good. The only other thing that I would add is that we will have a leak detection system underneath this new tank that the old tank does not have. That is a second impermeable barrier underneath the tank, such that if anything was to leak, it becomes visible, it becomes observable by the operations personnel that monitor that.
Okay, good. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councilor Donald. Councilor Bryce.
Thank you. Some of my questions have been asked. And you just mentioned that the life cycle of this tank will be 20 to 30 years?
Yes, I did, and I'll let Clayton, that has a design engineer, probably speak to that.
Sure. Actually, tanks are in service quite a bit longer than that, depending on how you look after them. So we do corrosion control on tanks. We are required by code to take the tanks out of service every 25
every 20 years. We have
to inspect them thoroughly. You do ultrasonic inspections on them, visual inspections to make sure that there's no degradation of the material, there hasn't been corrosion. All of the tanks are also coded on the bottoms so that they won't rust out, basically. So tanks, some of the tanks, that are in service at the terminal have been in service for 50 years. This particular tank that we want to demolish was built in the 1950s. We are taking it out of service regardless to do an inspection on it. Our expectation is that it won't be economically feasible to continue to use that particular tank, and that's one of the reasons we want to tear that one down.
Thank you. And that leads me to my next question. How many other tanks are out there that were built in the 1950s that you might look at in the next couple of years of upgrading, per se?
Sure. So the tankage in Regina originally was built in 1952-55 timeframe. There's 3 original tanks that were built. Tank 76, the one we're proposing to replace, Tank 77, and Tank 78. Tank 76 was in poor condition, we felt, and it was coming up for its 20-year out of service. And as Clayton mentioned, we felt it would be more economical to replace it with a new tank rather than try to repair it. Being a smaller tank, it didn't make economic sense to really spend a lot of money on it. The other 2 tanks that are of the same vintage are Tank 77 and 78. They're tied together through the piping system that Clayton spoke of earlier, and they're kind of utilized as one tank. We've had those 2 tanks out of service within the last 5 years, and probably invested a couple of $1 million in each one of the tanks to bring them up to a higher standard. So we're comfortable with the existing 2 1950 vintage tanks. This one was in a little worse shape. We thought it would be a better idea just to replace it with a new tank rather than to try to refurbish it.
Thank you. This new tank that you're using, any issues with anything to do with safety or environmental issues any time it's been used in the past?
The tank we're proposing to take down? No, we wouldn't.
No, not the tank that you're
sorry.
taking down, the one that you're putting in.
The new one we're going to put in? No, I don't. No, we would have no concern operating. It would be built to current modern standards, and no.
Okay, thank you. Will people who drive around the Ring Road notice any difference with the tanks? See anything different or not?
Yeah, Tank 76 is right on the corner of Winnipeg Street and 9th Avenue North. So it would just be kitty corner from the Co-op gas bar there and Co-op Home Center. So the new, and I don't want to say it's just a bit of an eyesore. It's kind of a little rusty, so it's not the best looking tank. The tank that we're proposing to construct would be similar in size to the tank that's visible when you're westbound on the Ring Road with the deer on the side of it. It would be similar size, so significantly bigger than the existing tank, and should aesthetically look a lot better, definitely. So
Okay. Thank you
that's
very
the
much.
difference you might notice.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Councillor Fraser.
Great. Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Thanks for coming today. I presume you own the land that this is situated on?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I'm just curious. We have quite a few abandoned gas stations around town that the land's been contaminated, and that's one of the issues we're faced with. We have all these little patches of land that nothing else can be built on. Supposing at some point, years, decades in the future, this isn't used for gas storage anymore, would this land be able to be used for something else, do you think? So actually, I have 2 questions in that.
Okay.
That's the first question, and I guess number 2, it sort of ties into it. Supposing there ever were a leak on this tank or any of the tanks, you have multiple tanks up there, what's your obligation to clean it up if there was a leak?
Okay, so for the first question, we are regulated by the National Energy Board, and they have some fairly rigorous and stringent standards around how we would decommission a site. I don't have those right in front of me, but I know some sites we've decommissioned. It has to be cleaned up to a very high standard before the NEB will sign off on it. So as our regulator, we're obligated to comply with their standards, which again meet or exceed provincial standards. And the second question is, we operate 8 tanks in the Regina Terminal. We have the tank integrity program to verify their integrity on an annual basis. On a 5-year basis, we do a more in-depth, rigorous in-service evaluation. And on a 20-year interval, we do an out-of-service inspection where we actually take the tank out of service, clean it, and do a very thorough assessment of all of the welds and steel within the tank. So I think that program in itself gives us quite a bit of confidence that we shouldn't have any leaks with our tankage in Regina Terminal.
Okay. Is your obligation, I mean, again, I don't mean to compare apples and oranges here, but would your obligation, do you think, be greater than some of these downtown locations or locations across the city that.
I'm not really familiar with what obligation they're under. They would, I suspect, just be under maybe the municipal regulations, which I'm not. I can't speak to those at all. But I know our NEB regulations are very rigorous.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think as you can also appreciate, Enbridge is a very large company that does this work, across North America. We feel that we have a social responsibility as well to maintain these sites.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Flagel.
Thanks. A couple of quick things. Excuse me. Representing the ward in Ward 10, and then Councillor Bryce and I both close to, we have residential areas close to that. So is there anything that the residents should know about that exists today and or may come in the future with the new tank?
I don't think so. We have a public awareness program.
Okay.
So anyone, again, regulated by the NEB, anyone who's within, I believe it's 100 meters of the pipeline, we have to make contact with on a 3-year basis, I believe, and give them contact information about the pipeline, as well as any information they would request of us after our initial contact. So I think that program, the public awareness program, should cover off questions that any landowners, any property owners within our vicinity would have. Over and above that, we could certainly,
Right.
Answer any questions. But I don't. To answer your original question, no, I don't think there's, excuse me, anything new that this tank would introduce that would cause us to have to go back to and make anyone aware of anything
Okay.
new. So.
Thanks for that. And to further that is the with them having some issues with CCRL. Are you guys working hand in hand together, or are you a separate entity when it comes to storage away from manufacturing? Or are you correlated together?
We are definitely a separate entity from
Yes.
CCRL.
Thank you.
We're a different company. We have no business ties to CCRL. However, they are a big customer of ours.
Yes.
We deliver basically all of the product that CCRL refines comes off the Enbridge pipeline system, as well as many of the refined products that they ship out are shipped on the Enbridge pipeline systems. So, we have significant interaction with them on a business level, but on an ownership, there's no connection there.
Thank you. I need clarification on that for the public. The Deer one,
Okay.
how big is it and how old is it?
The Deer one was built in 1994, and it's a 150,000 barrel tank.
And when you're going to build the new one,
Is
if it goes through?
190,000 barrel tank.
190, so it will be bigger?
Yes.
Are you going to have somebody commissioned to paint that and beautify it like that one is? Because that's the talk of the town on the north end, really, it is.
Yeah.
It's-
I don't know if this is the proper place to make this joke or not, but I've been thinking about putting an Edmonton Eskimos in on the tank.
You may
That'll go over well. Yeah.
actually, I think you crossed the line on that one. Sorry, just
I
kidding.
think your stock prices just went down. But, yeah. No, that's good, because I really, and just as a note, and I think it's important that we, as if there's a possibility to have something like that done, it would be nice to see, because it would help. And I don't know if that's something that you guys started in Regina or have continued it on throughout North America and the world, or?
It's definitely been discussed regarding
Okay.
this project as well. We haven't, gone to the part of actually engaging somebody to do that, or actually even having, formal corporate approval to do it. It'll certainly be a painted tank in any case. So we'll definitely be looking
Yeah.
at that. We have, I think in our major terminals, Edmonton, for one, has, I think it's Canada.
Do they have a
Goose.
rider one in Edmonton? Do they have a rider signature?
Oh, I can talk to them about that. Actually, I grew up in Saskatchewan, so it was kind of a poor joke on my part anyway.
One other thing about the, if this all goes through, when could we see, like you mentioned, that it's probably a potential that this is going to happen, but if it is, because of the other tank not meeting the specifications and cost, when would you start to dismantle the existing one, and would you build the new one like right away? When would you start, I guess?
If we have, as soon as we have the approvals that we need, and a development permit from yourselves, from the City of Regina is
Okay.
one of those requirements. We would be prepared by the end of June to start mid-June to end of June to start taking down the old tank.
Okay.
Now that will only take about a week, and then we have some earthwork to start to do over the summer. The new tank would start to be erected in mid-fall, late October to beginning of November.
Perfect. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. Councillor Young.
So, thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you for coming again. Most of my questions have been asked, but I will ask this one. Have there ever been any spills on any of the tanks here?
No, I think we spoke to that last time we were here, and while we have had some small spills within the facility on pumps and some of the lines, we haven't had any spills associated with the tankage in the Regina terminal.
Okay. And can you tell me what the city is asking you to do to ensure that there's something in place in case there is one?
Your emergency response plan, that's great.
Yeah, we have an emergency response plan. We have a mutual aid agreement with CCRL, so we can leverage their spill response equipment too. So we do have a full battery of spill response equipment if there ever was a leak. We're more geared up for probably pipeline leaks than we are for tank leaks. Tank leaks aren't very common. I guess theoretically you could overfill a tank, but that would be very rare, and we have really rigorous safeguards in place to ensure that doesn't happen. So, yeah, are we prepared to respond? Yes, but more so to pipeline leaks as opposed to tank leaks, which again are very, very rare.
Can you give us any information about what else the city is asking you to do to ensure that this project goes forward safely?
Well, again, I think to meet all of the regulatory requirements, we are certainly very aware of the protection of the aquifer and the sensitivity around that aquifer. All of our plans for how we would construct are taking that into account, to not excavate beyond what we should be excavating, and any piles and so forth that would penetrate that aquifer will be treated in a way such that we will minimize any possible permeation.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question on clarification to help me understand this whole regulatory environment that you work in. It sounds very complex, and I'm just kind of trying to get my head around roles and responsibilities, that once the tank is in place and ready to roll, who signs off the final commitment saying, yes, it's met all? Because there's federal officials, there's provincial officials, there's city officials, I'm sure, our fire chief's office, emergency measures, et cetera, CCRL, yourselves. I'm just curious, is there a massive team that kind of puts their signature? It's kind of an accountability question, I think, that just guaranteeing that everything we're hearing tonight is actually being put into place and meets all the standards. I'm just, we do rely heavily on all these agencies and making sure that they're all doing their jobs properly, so that we're comfortable for the citizens that they're getting a very safe project. So I'm just curious as to how you pull it all together to get that final signature.
Any permits that we receive from the municipality will have conditions attached to it. We make sure that we have a compliance group actually that helps us with that, but we keep track of all of the conditions that are put upon us, and we make sure that we answer to all of those conditions. As far as a final sign-off, the National Energy Board is the one that we have to convince that we've done everything. They are sort of a final overseer on it. We will have to supply them all of our X-ray records, all of our hydrotest records, all of our material standards that we use. They will review all of that, and then they will provide us what's called a leave to open, which allows us to go ahead and flood the facilities.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Murray.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Thank you, gentlemen, for all the questions. Obviously, there's interest in here, or council wouldn't invest as much time, and I appreciate taking the time and doing a great job of answering those. My question is around the location of Tank 76 and its proximity to the co-op gas station that you referred to. I guess my thought would be around catastrophic event that occurs at a gas station. You've got in their case, a fairly large vessel, a propane vessel. So in the event that you had a major fire, you had a levee that happened, what would the proximity levee is for, you guys obviously would know, but a boiling liquid vapor explosion, boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. So propane tank heats up, gets really, really hot, explodes with a tremendous amount of force, can do quite a bit of damage. Obviously, it's safe where it is. There's been no issues or it wouldn't be there. The proximity to your tank, concerns around that?
I don't think so. No, we've got a fair buffer there. There's the Co-op gas station. There's the CPR main line there that runs right through there. Then there's still probably 300 feet of our property before we'd actually encounter the tank berm, and then probably another 20, 30 feet before we'd actually encounter the tank of the wall. So I think we're comfortable with the spacing. Again, we've got the tank berm there to contain anything that would happen on our end. I guess, I can't rule out a catastrophic, once in a lifetime type of thing. Maybe doing some damage to our tank, but I don't think it's a high probability event in our mind anyway.
Well, I agree, and one would hope it would never happen.
Yeah.
Obviously, we need to plan for things that they could once, maybe only once, but we never want it to happen. Right. So the tank itself, is it at risk then being a floating lid or floating top? Would it be at risk of you had a fire around it? Could it also then potentially become, or is what you're storing in there not?
There's no vapors that are there that would catch fire off of a floating roof tank because of the way it's constructed. On top of that, the tanks will have what's called a semi-fixed foam system on it, such that if there was any kind of rim seal fire, the foam is applied and it trickles down basically the insides of the tanks and smothers out any fire. Plus, we have fire water monitors around the tanks to protect against any heat. So we can cool the shell of the tank if an adjacent tank is on fire. So those are the things that we would do.
Okay. So, for all those people out there that may have searched YouTube and looked for these catastrophic events that obviously do occur around the globe, and they do happen, and obviously I can't speak to any one of them, I don't know, but those types of things are obviously top of mind when it comes to safety about having something like this. Obviously, the proximity to residential, and that would be Councillor Bryce's and up towards Councillor Feigel's neighborhoods. Obviously they have concerns, and as do all of us. So obviously you're taking time. Thank you for that. The berms that you've referred to here, are they an earthen berm then, or steel berm, or what's the?
Earthen.
Earthen berms?
Yes.
Okay. And so there's no concerns there. They'll have a liner or a way to ensure there's no.
Well, they are lined. They're compacted clay lining across the terminal. It's accepted method of providing an impermeable barrier against any leaks. The earthen berms are compacted, and they're measured to I can't tell you just off the top because I'm not a civil engineer what the proctor is on those berms, but they are compacted to a point where they will not break, for instance, if there was an oil leak in the tank.
Okay, so that's a significant amount of volume of product. In the event that tank was right full, that's a significant amount there. So I appreciate the safety that's obviously gone in and the discussions around that. I appreciate this is not something that you've gone into lightly, and obviously not something that you would do very flippantly. So I appreciate the hard work that went into it, and Your Worship, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming forward and answering questions. Thanks.
There's no other questions from council. You can return to the gallery. Thank you very much for your answering all of our questions.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
We have another delegation, D14-46, Sir Jim Elliott. Sir, if you could identify yourself, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and there may be questions of members of council afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Jim Elliott. Now, tonight I'd like you to imagine that where we're standing today is, in fact, that 50,000-barrel tank that's been discussed earlier this evening. And again, imagine that you live close to that, and in fact, in respect to this current location, works out to be the south entrance to the Cornwall Centre, or about 360 meters away from this council chamber. And lastly, imagine that you send your children to a school that is about 900 meters away from this tank. And in my analogy, that works out to be the south entrance to the Broad Street underpass. Now, what I'm about to tell you for the rest of my presentation is in fact not imaginations, but in fact a real situation. The planning for this change in the hazardous materials storage tank before you has been in the works for over a year. This 50,000 barrel tank is now being replaced with a 190,000 barrel tank, so almost something 4 times as large. Up until recently, it was originally planned to be 250,000 barrels, but was scaled back recently to that 190,000 barrels. Now again, you're living at that house, and again, I look at the Cornwall Center entrance as your house location. You were not even notified of this change in hazard. Your school, which is in this case McDermott School, is only 900 meters away from the change in hazard, and again, they weren't notified of this. Your community association, the Northeast Community Association, again, was not notified of this change. And lastly, your school board, the Regina Public School Board, was not notified of this change in hazard. When this concern was put to the Regina Planning Commission, some of whom are councillors in this room who will be making the decision on this proposed development, did not ask our city administration why these residents and school board were not notified. One may think that there would be a cursory interest in getting an answer to that question, but again, no questions were asked or answered in April 23rd. There is very much an interest in the aquifer protection, as was tonight, because of course there is a bylaw that requires them to be very concerned about the aquifer. Now, as I was there at April 23rd, I should acknowledge that the councillor representing that area was not present at that Planning Commission meeting or was required to attend that Planning Commission meeting. So just because this planning change is happening in the Ross industrial area does not justify the absence of notification to residents in the vicinity of the development. Just because there is no requirement to notify residents of this change in hazard does not end the liability of this city in the event of an accident or fire, or that they should have been notified. And lastly, the city administration has put legally binding caveats on the properties in the Somerset subdivision to require them to be aware of the hazard, and yet they're over 1,000 meters away from the refinery. So why are some residents in the Northeast Community Association who live less than 400 meters considered lesser citizens? Thank you very much, and I'll consider questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott, for your presentation. Are there questions of the delegation? Councillor Fraser.
Great. Thanks to you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thanks for your presentation, Jim. Some good thoughts there. Do you have any thoughts to share? I mean, it was brought up a couple times about this being a newer tank. You know, it is a larger capacity. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess notwithstanding the public concern about any kind of storage tank in the vicinity of a residential area, I guess my concern is more on the volume of the hazard and not necessarily the hazard itself, although, again, with some of the accidents we've had in the vicinity of that location, I do, have some concerns about any kind of oil storage tank that in that close proximity to the residential areas.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you. Do you have any concerns with a tank that's over 50 years old sitting there?
At this point, my concerns are more with the volume of material that's in that tank. As has been indicated by the company, there hasn't been a a problem with it, but at some point, those tanks will fail. The only other thing I would add is that it was identified by the gentleman from Enbridge that in fact this tank is of poorer quality or something of that sort than the other tanks, and so I guess I'd be a little more concerned with this one as compared to the other ones.
Councilor Bryce?
So, through your worship, are you saying that you'd rather see us leave a 50-year-old tank than get a newer one that's up to date with technology and safety regulations? Just so I get it clear.
My preference would be that that tank wouldn't be there. So my preference is, in fact, that they would move that tank somewhere else, further away from residential areas.
The current tank or the new tank?
Well, I guess my sense from the discussions is it's probably cheaper to move the tank than it would be to leave it in its current position. So, or to replace it, I should say, in its current position.
Okay, just one last question. So you're okay with the tank over 50 years old being there?
As I've stated before, I'm not happy with any tank within 300 meters or so of residential areas. I think it should be moved, or some additional protection should be put to protect the residents of that neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. And for the record, I think the words used by the delegation was a higher quality for the new one, not a poorer quality for the old one. I think there's a big difference to be made. Other questions of the delegation? Thank you, Mr. You returned to the gallery, and we'll now consider the report. Actually, we have a communication from Enbridge. If I could have a motion on this report, CP 14-7. Seconder, please.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Okay. Any debate on this? We've already had many questions answered, Councilor Donald, by the delegation on this report.
If you don't mind, just so that I could read one line out of the recommendation. It says the project has received approval from the National Energy Board, and Enbridge will comply with all local and provincial requirements for the project. I just want that read, please.
Right. Sure. And that certainly was, they made it clear in their delegation as well. Other comments on the communication? All those on the communication letter itself? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll go to the main report, and this is a planning commission for the storage facility at 9th Avenue North. Councilor Donald.
Thank you. I'd like to move 1453, proposed hazardous materials storage facility, 439 9th Avenue North.
And a seconder for that, please. Seconder, Councilor Young.
Your Worship, as there is through the letter that we previously accepted, and in this report, it states 250,000 size tank as compared to 190. I'd like to make an amendment first that we in fact change the report to read 190.
Okay, a seconder for that? That's what they're going to get. Councilor Flagel, a debate on the amendment. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Good, thanks for
Councilor
that. Just so that we're accurate. There are a couple of things in the recommendations that I think are important to read. Prior to the issuance of the site approval, the applicant shall submit a pre-use baseline soil chemical characterization survey for petroleum products, trace materials, sulfates, salinity, and provide a copy to the city. Submit for review the Enbridge safety manual and policies component covering storage and handling requirements for the typical construction materials. The applicant shall submit to the satisfaction of the Director of Construction and Compliance a plan to prevent trenches acting as conduits for the spread of contamination through the underground piping network. And 4, provide documentation from the Saskatchewan Ministry of the Environment and/or federal regulatory authority for approval to construct, alter, expand, operate, and decommission a hazardous substance and/or waste dangerous goods facility. I think what you heard from the delegation, the proponent, is that what they'd like to do is take an old tank out of service and plus some of the materials that are used to both control and bring the materials into a new pipe. The new storage facility will be built to a current standard, i.e. more safe. You'll note that the materials and the suppression system that they have to have will look after the aquifer to the best of their ability at this time. You'll note that the way the design of this new tank is, that for the best of their ability, also the amount of air quality will be controlled. That's very poorly said, but it will be handled. There are some suppression materials built into this. I would suggest to you that this is a huge improvement of what's there. Planning Commission would look for concurrence, please.
Thank you, Councilor Donald. Are there other comments on this report? Councilor Flagel.
Thank you. I just want to state that in the Uplands area, I didn't have any calls regarding this. And if anybody has ever said anything about it, they just want to make sure. And that's why I asked the question. They always put Enbridge and CCRL in the same box, but they're not. They are clients or customers of each other, and that's great, and that's how they became as big as they are. But the fact of the matter is that we're replacing a 50-year-old building that's rusting out and is going to cause 60-year-old, actually almost 60. It's going to increase the capacity, which, you know what, if a 100,000-gallon tanker is going to blow, what's the difference if it's 150 or 170? It's not a good thing. These guys have come forward and are going to put in a new project and a new one, and they're talking about potentially down the road having to replace others, so they'll be back in front of here again. And I think it's a great thing. The one delegation was talking about close to everything, close to everything. 1955, Coronation Park was just getting built. Uplands was not there. So who was there first? And not to say that that's right or wrong, but I'm saying we need to work with these corporate partners. And I think by us approving this and moving forward and giving ourselves a safer environment, making them corporately responsible for replacing aged, older, they're safe, because if they weren't safe, they'd have been shut down. Not by us, but by the national NAB, I think it's called, NAB.
National Energy Board.
National Energy Board, not Regina. So remember that. We need to remember that this is a worldwide company that is governed by the federal government and all others that are around it. So this is a great project, and I'm glad they're going through with it, because obviously it's needed, and if they paint it Eskimo, it doesn't matter. It's still a new building.
I draw the line at Eskimos, I'm just saying. Councilor Fraser.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Certainly a complicated issue. I guess one thing on my mind, the second attachment to this report, there's an aerial photograph of the area, and I can count 47 storage units in the area. So, I mean, as a capacity issue, I appreciate this is, 4 times they're about as large, but sort of in the general sense of capacity, I don't think this is a really, so much a change in scopes. This would be the biggest storage unit sort of in the area, but again, as far as total capacity goes, it's not that we're really changing the whole nature of what's there. And certainly, I guess, for me personally, it's a balance of that between, an upgrading of technology. It's been brought up a few times that this is quite an old tank, and to me, any failure would be, we don't want to see that at all, and new technology, surely is more capable than the older technology. I guess my greater concern would still lie with some of the older tanks in the area. Again, to note that there's what I can count from this photograph, at least 46 other tanks in the area. I'm just wondering, so surely, the safety aspect of this, the National Energy Board is in a better capacity to regulate that than the city is. But I'm just wondering, what exactly is our power as the city? I mean, obviously, I guess we could vote against this here, and we couldn't stop them from using that old tank on this vote, but we could stop them from building a new tank. I'm just wondering, though, let's presume that sometime, certainly beyond the term of this council, but maybe even, beyond the term of our, the next generation, the city, or the next generation after that, supposing that this isn't needed as storage capacity anymore, and we want to turn it into something else. Does the city have any is there anything we could do to sort of protect this land to make sure that once this isn't used for oil storage anymore, that it will be, we won't run into the same problem that we've run into with gas stations downtown or across the city, that we would make sure that the land's left in a place. Certainly for Enbridge, it's been mentioned, Enbridge is a very big company, so, I'm sure the return on their investment to this land will be well paid over several thousands times or so by the time we get done with it, but versus them just sitting on it when it's done versus us being able to turn it into something else. Again, we're talking decades down the road, but is there anything within our power to sort of increase that environmental regulation? Thanks.
Mr. Carlston.
Your Worship, I think what's being referenced is control almost post-use for adaptive type of use, and we don't have a high level of authority to demand change within land uses or cleanup, as you've seen with certain infill service station brownfield sites. Certain mechanisms the city can look at are financial incentives, tax incentives, some sort of policy incentives, or working with the property owner. But beyond that, I don't think our powers extend to demanding change in use or cleanup to change a use. And I might just look over to the city solicitor or Mr. Brown, Mr. Jeff Brown, if there's any comments to add.
Any comments?
Through you, Your Worship, and just in terms of other authority, in terms of cleanup and such, I mean, there is, of course, the provincial authority that requires, if there was any spills or anything like that required, they would have to report it immediately and take action to prevent any migration of that spill. And then as the first delegation noted as well, too, there's a number of requirements under the National Energy Board that they would have to be compliant to as well, in terms of both monitoring and decommissioning.
Okay, thank you. So I guess just my final thought, for me personally, the balance here is this added capacity. It's a challenge in many Canadian cities where residential areas end up butting up against industrial areas, which is too bad, but it's part of the reality of our city and many other cities across Canada. So for me personally, the balance is, again, this added capacity versus the, presumably the added sort of safety value of people reinvesting in their capital. So there's no, there's not a failure just for the sake of something being rusted out. And I think on that balance, I think that I will support this motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Other comments on the report? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Our last report, committee report, Executive Committee, Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a recommendation from the Executive Committee concerning citizen appointments to the Regina Planning Commission. The recommendation is as follows. One, that the following citizens be appointed to the Regina Planning Commission for terms of office effective immediately and expiring as follows: David Edwards, December 31, 2014, Phil Selinsky, December 31, 2015, Laureen Snook, December 31, 2015, and that the members appointed to the Regina Planning Commission continue to hold office for the term indicated for each vacancy or until their successors are appointed.
Could I have a seconder for that report, please? Councillor O'Donnell. Comments or questions on this report? Councillor O'Donnell.
Just as Chair, I am very comfortable with the three names. These are long-serving and well-serving members of the Planning Commission. Would seek your support, please.
Other comments or questions? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion to adjourn.
I'll move the motion, Your
Second
Worship.
for that, please. Councillor Bryce. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, everyone. It could have been a short evening. Thank you.